Hi, I'm doing all these videos on the fly at the last minute because it's just about the content at this point. If I may develop them into something else later. So, hi, how are you? We're going to talk about the bystander effect and how it is important to understand thought control, high control groups, high demand groups, new religious movements that are both constructive, pro-social, and destructive when thought control, mind control comes into play. So, the bystander effect. The bystander effect, as I taught in class, is about Kitty Genovese, the famous case. She was living in Kew Gardens, Queens, I believe it was. An area where there were a lot of big kind of brick buildings, red brick buildings. They had just built this kind of almost suburb of brick buildings out in Queens. And what happened was this destroyed the inner city communities, like in the Lower East Side, parts of Brooklyn, where they were tight-knit, usually ethnic communities. People then moved out of those communities and into the suburbs, or into places like Kew Gardens, Forest Hills, kind of suburban, urban areas. And this happens all over. And one thing that happened there was when the traditional societies were broken up, when the traditional cities, towns were broken up, this was in New York City, but this happens all over the world. People don't get to know their neighbors. They don't really care too much about their neighbors. I mean, I live in a building for 4 years, and I know a few people there, but it's very common in large cities not to know your neighbors. So the bystander effect, and this happens often, especially in big cities still, when you hear somebody screaming outside, there could be thousands of people, screams all night long. In my neighborhood, all night long you hear screams. So the idea was Kitty Genovese was robbed and murdered because people were just hearing her scream. Nobody did anything about it, and this is called the bystander effect. Now, this is kind of the way we live today. Many of us who live in big cities will see something happening and not say or do anything. It's very common. That's not to say we should blame ourselves, but how does this work in cults? What often happens, and ex-members, people that come out of these groups, even some high-pressure sales groups, different setups. When people come out of these groups, what they tend to say is that they often suffer some kind of psychological damage, psychological problems, and a lot of this comes in the form of humiliation, usually by a higher-ranking member or by the cult leader or the group leader. And what members will do is they'll either say, "It happened to me and nobody did anything," or "I saw it happening to somebody who I considered a good friend, and because it was the leader, and because that person was, not acting in compliance with the rules, or critical, or doubting, or whatever. You just woke up and wore the wrong underpants today." Literally, in groups like the Theosophical groups, they plan what underwear they're going to wear, or what clothes they're going to wear, what colors they're going to wear. It's a high level of control in these groups. So what happens is when there is some kind of humiliation, denigration of another human being, bullying, it tends to get overlooked because people don't want to be associated with rebelliousness or with questioning authority. So what happens is people will kind of like sit there, and the leader will humiliate someone, and they'll ha 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 ha. They'll sit and laugh. The issue is when they get out of these high demand groups, they tend to feel a lot of guilt over this. So one issue that counselors who have people exiting high demand groups have is they will have to deal with this psychological trauma that comes having been a bystander many times, to humiliation, to bullying. And honestly, in groups like that, in high demand groups, there's no guilt there really, because the person believed this worked at the time, unless they were witness to a murder or something. When people are in these groups, they believe everything they do is the truth. There is a thought control program. We looked at Margaret Singer's 6 Conditions of Thought Control. There's a thought control program, so everything you do has meaning. So for example, if you see your master, your supreme leader, divine guru, spiritual master, beating or hitting or talking about a friend of yours and really humiliating them, well then you may think, oh, that's their karma. That's what they deserve. It's their karma. And me witnessing this is watching my perfect divine teacher exercise this person's karma out of them. And isn't that wonderful that I get to be a witness to this, and I'm helping humanity by doing this. See, and we will cover this in my class, it's a closed system of logic. So basically people are going to come up with justifications for being a bystander or for engaging in acts of evil, because being a bystander in some ways is an act of evil. I think Martin Luther King said it's not those who didn't do anything, but those who stood by. Some paraphrasing Dr. Martin Luther King, but the whole point is that you can justify the people that are in these groups very deeply, especially if they're maladaptive. They can justify their behaviors by saying, well, you know, it's because of X, Y, and Z, but it's usually within this closed system of logic, and that's where it becomes difficult, maladaptive, antisocial, and possibly dangerous. So we'll see you later. These videos, maybe I'll record them from a big studio one day, but not for now. Bye-bye.